before I was 21 and too old to enjoy it.
All right. Well, good morning. Shabbat Shalom. We are starting. The name of this portion is Pinchas or Phineas, which is funny because most of the story about Phineas is in the previous portion. But we are going to talk about Phineas a little bit because we didn't get to Phineas last week, so we'll pick up with Phineas. So, Numbers 25, we get this is after, so this is right after all these prophecies, oracles from Balaam. And, it's this whole thing, right, that they can't, that Balaam can't curse Israel. Every time he tries to curse them, he blesses them, right? And it's this, so it sounds a lot like that would be really encouraging to Israel to obey and to follow the Lord and do what he says. And then we find out that that's not working out so well. And so there's all kinds of crazy things going on. So there's lots of sexual immorality. There's lots of sacrificing to pagan gods. The Lord is angry, understandably so, and he's basically telling Moses to bring all of all these people before him and kill them, right? And we find out somewhere in the midst of here that there's a plague. We don't know what the plague is, but there was a plague going on somehow in the midst of this too. And Phineas, son of Eleazar the Cohen, which Eleazar is going to take the role of the high priest. He's Aaron's son, who's going to become the high priest. So this is the next generation Phineas. And he, in his zeal, takes a spear and strikes them through the belly. And actually, I was reading something that was really interesting about how this is translated. Because in some translations it sounds almost like, I don't know, what actually happened is that he went through both of them at the same time, which means they were doing something very inappropriate in front of everyone. And so the way the TLB translated it does make that clear, but there's some translations that are a little funny about it, but he strikes both of them at the same time. Then that's where we find out there's a plague, and it was stopped, but 24,000 had died because of this. So because of their immorality and their sacrificing to pagan gods, and their all the other things they were doing. So people like to use this story as this, righteous zeal moment, and it is that. However, I think we also have to be careful that we don't take it too far, right? Because this is a little bit, and again, this is one of those situations where we don't have a lot of information, right? We don't have a lot of detail about this. Like, we know what happened, but we don't know a lot of the because Phineas sees that this is happening, but he doesn't have the Lord saying, "Go do this." But it seems like the Lord was happy with it, so sometimes it feels a little bit like this was kind of a gamble, that this was going to be okay. And it was, but it's one of those things that I think that it's like, yes, this is definitely an example of righteous zeal, and I think it shows the purity of heart that was in Phineas, because I think that's what motivated him, is that there's this,
The gamble was his. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that Phineas deciding to run these two people through with a spear was that the Lord was going to be okay with that, was kind of the risk he was taking.
Weren't they taking a risk as well?
Well, yeah. They were clearly doing what the Lord had already spoken. They knew what they were doing was wrong.
Then what was the point?
Good question. What was the point?
Spear.
Why do we have this story? Yeah.
But it does doesn't seem to be much of a risk because the law already said to put to death people that did this. So, so it wasn't like too much of a risk.
Yeah. There's usually a little more due process involved in it, rather than just seeing it and acting.
There's pretty good evidence
on the moment. So yes,
pretty good, easy conviction.
Sure.
This might not be a good example, but I'm just thinking of like when is it John that says like, do you want us to call down fire and like destroy the city? And Jesus is basically like, you're immature and you don't understand the gospel. And so I was processing when you were talking about it, I was processing through that and being like, I think it's a little gamble. Like God might be like, good job, and God might also be like, that was the right idea, but you shouldn't have done that, and there might be a big consequence.
Right. So yeah, and so sometimes it's interesting to look at those things because there are moments when like these things happen and like these dramatic things happen, and the Lord really wants people to react in different ways. I do think that this is an example of like they're not supposed to allow, right? There's been a lot of instruction of like, don't let, like, this is why you're not supposed to intermarry with these people, like, right? These are the Moabites, which that gets complicated later too because we know that Ruth is a Moabite, but that's a different situation again. But we know like they're not supposed to be taking these people as wives. They're not because the Lord doesn't want them to be drawn away into other pagan worship. Yeah.
Well, they seem to intermingle Moabite and Midianite because later they refer to her as a Midianite woman. So they keep doing this back and forth. But one of the studies I read on this story, basically it says, they're here at the tent of the meeting, right? And it says that this man brought her right there in front of the tent of the meeting that they're at. And some of the commentators say that when it says that he ran in or he went in after them into the tent, because in the pagan practices to have sex before the gods was fairly normal. One rabbi that I believe it was a rabbi that I read that they believed that this man had the audacity, or this woman was like, let's please your God and go into the tent and do this. And of course, it was the Levite's job to make sure that the tent wasn't defiled, right? So if the audacity was, we're going to do this before your God, and this is the tent that they went in to do this, then that extreme of reaction would be completely appropriate in that.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like the argument of what tent did he go in and pursue them into? Right.
So it's really interesting to read some of those things because there's that theory. There's some that it wasn't that it was outside of it in front of everyone, so everyone can see. And there's some different ideas about it, and they're all really interesting.
He wasn't a Midianite. I mean,
No.
I think he's unbelievably ignorant, stupidity.
Yeah.
But on her part, maybe, but not on his. He should have known better.
Right. But it goes back to like, I think that God knows people's hearts and knows that some of these men will be drawn away by women, either to pagan worship or to immoral actions, or both, in some cases. And so he's trying to, because he's trying to bring, he's trying to set Israel apart. He's trying to make them this nation that doesn't do things that the other nations do. But at the same time, they have all these other cultures and nations surrounding them that do all of these things. And it's really hard to change the mindset of like, well, this is just what you do. So there's a lot going on here with this story, but I do think it's interesting that it does get it's interesting that where it's dropped to, like, 'cause it's right after this whole thing with Balaam, right, and blessing Israel, and right before we really it's really a shifting point where we really start focusing on the next generation and their preparation to go into the land. So it's this. I think it's in some ways it feels to me a little bit like a warning of like, hey, don't think everything's good, right? Like, don't like take anything for granted. And every generation and every household in there kind of has to be almost this like, I don't know, I guess the phrase that comes to mind is like constant vigilance of like keeping to what the Lord says and not falling into these patterns of the rest of the nations. Yeah.
Miss Emma, do we know, or like, is there a believed theory? Because I know we don't have a lot of information, but like, where Jethro is in all of this and what is believed about Jethro during this whole situation?
I think the assumption is that he lives in his own land and he's doing his own thing.
Okay.
Because it was offered to him to join Israel, but he would have had to give up his position as a Midianite priest, and he chose to not do that. Though it does seem that he had an acknowledgement and under some level of understanding of the power of the God of Israel. He did not choose to join them. So I think the assumption is that he's off doing his own thing.
He's just somewhere else. He's
Yeah.
a Midianite, but
He's a
somewhere
Midianite.
else.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe he was around during this, maybe not, it doesn't say, but he, or maybe by this point, we don't know how old he was, right? And when
Right.
Moses was with him before the Exodus, obviously he's older than Moses, and so he maybe is not alive anymore. We don't know, it doesn't tell us. We don't have a record of Jethro's death, but it's possible that he's not even living anymore, I think, at this point, because we're getting into the second generation, so I think it's very likely that he's passed away by this point. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't have a whole lot else. I mean, we could talk about Phineas forever, but I want to move on, I think. So the rest of this portion is, like I said, very much looking toward the next generation, and we only have one more portion in Numbers? Do we have two? I don't remember. One more?
Next week's a double
Oh,
portion.
it was a double portion, that's right. So only one more week. But that's right, it's a double portion. And so we're coming to the end, and it does very much focus on this next generation. So there's several things that I think are really interesting about this. And then the end of this week's portion is all about the holidays, which is also an interesting, like, why did we drop this in here? You know? So I kind of want to talk about the two topics that I mainly wanted to talk about were this kind of generational transfer inheritance theme, as well as the holidays. And even though we don't actually have instruction about how to keep the holidays in this portion, I think there's some interesting things that we can take from that. I don't usually focus on that part, but I was kind of fascinated by what I was seeing in it this time. So we'll see if we get there. So chapter 26 gives us the census of the second generation. And I don't have a whole lot to say about the census necessarily, other than it is interesting to note that, actually, let's see if I can find this quote, because I think it was really funny. Okay, a couple things, actually. So one thing we learned is that Korah's family, there are some who have remained after that rebellion, even though many of them were swallowed up by the earth. So it does seem that some have remained. And what Dennis Prager points out by that, and we've talked about that before, because we have psalms that are from the sons of Korah and things like that, is that it's showing us that, like, the Torah doesn't, we're seeing the principle that the Torah doesn't necessarily hold the children responsible for their parents' sins. And so they're continuing on. We talked about also in the instructions of when they moved the tabernacle, that this family has some specific roles, and it even says like that this family must be preserved. So we're seeing that that's playing out. So we're seeing that that is remaining true. And then the other thing that we're seeing is that when we get to the end of the census and all the numbering of all the tribes and things like that, it gives us a total of a little over 600,000. which is interesting because we've had multiple plagues, we've had multiple rebellions, we've had multiple situations where a lot of people die by this point. And yet, the number of Israel is actually remaining roughly the same. It's grown slightly, I think, actually. And some of the tribes, I can't remember all the details right now, but I think it's like Judah has grown quite a bit. There's a couple other tribes that have grown quite a bit, but everything's kind of overall kind of held steady, which is kind of amazing. And Dennis Prager quotes a rabbi, and he says, and basically going on, and they're also living in the desert, right? They're not living in an easy situation. In the ancient world, life expectancy, birth rates, things like that usually are not great. But yeah, the number of Israel is at least remaining the same. And it says, given all these factors, the birth rate was not just equal, but prolific. And I just found that kind of funny. So again, we're finding that Israel is fulfilling this commandment of being fruitful and multiplying even in the midst of their own rebellion and unfaithfulness and living in the desert and not being in the fullness of what God has promised them. They're still fulfilling that. And there's a lot of talk about, like, are these literal numbers? Are they a metaphor? Are they all these things? Like, are they literal or are they not? And I don't know. There's a lot of interesting arguments about all of that, and I don't know. Yeah.
Is there a count of, I'm sure someone's done it, but do you know, based on all the references, how many Israelites have died since leaving Egypt? Now, eventually, the entire generation dies in the wilderness, but like through all the plagues or all of the different situations?
I'm sure someone has done estimates of that. I don't know what those numbers are. I'm sure you could find all kinds of ideas about that somewhere out on the internet. But yeah, the whole first generation, so they've essentially replaced themselves is kind of what this is saying, because they're numbering the second generation, which is a military census. So even though the first generation has all died, they still have roughly the same number of people to fight. So it kind of gives us the idea that roughly that many people have died or are dying. And we don't, because it's a military census, we don't know what the number of women and children, and we don't know we don't know who is left. They're not entering the land yet, so probably not quite everyone has died from the first generation. And so it's really hard to estimate on that. I'm sure people have tried and come up with some really interesting numbers, but I think it would be pretty difficult to get too precise on that. Yeah.
I just might mention that Simeon's tribe reduced the most drastically, and Zimri, the man that was had the spirit through him, was a Simonite.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
And a leader.
there's some speculation, there's correlation there.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of, again, it's like one of those things, like, there's a lot of people who like to say, and it's really interesting. I don't tend to chase the rabbit through all of it, because I'm like, it's really interesting, but we don't know fully. That there are, like, some of the numbers of the tribes are representative of the level of obedience of that tribe and their leaders, like you're saying. And it's hard. It doesn't say that, so it's like we don't know, but it also seems like that's very possible. So it's really interesting to look at all these numbers in the Bible are so fascinating, which we're going to talk more about some numbers in a little bit. But so it's interesting to look at it. And we of course know that. This is also where we find out that when they do enter the land, they're supposed to divide the inheritance in accordance with the numbers of the tribes. So we find that out. It talks again about the Levite families, even though they're not really included in the census because they're not going. They are counted because they're in the service of the temple, but they're not included with the previous census because they're not going to be going out to battle and things like that. So it's kind of like almost this like not really a reset, but it's very much a like, okay, this is where things stand right now as we're getting toward the end of the wilderness period and getting ready to go in, and this is kind of where things stand as far as where the nation of Israel is.
I find the counting of the Levites interesting basically because they don't get to inherit land, and yeah, they don't go out to battle, yet when they do this census, and we see a lot of the rebellions have been like the Levitical different families fighting Moses and Aaron for power, and we see that kind of coalition there. But the Levites did increase in numbers. Like they were one of the tribes that you saw, even though there was all these rebellions in them, they increased in number. And so I almost felt like it's like, how many Levites do we have? Because you guys are going to have to absorb these people. And so that would be one reason for counting them. But I also kind of thought the second reason was just so that you can see that even through the rebellions, these people did not diminish.
Right. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's significant. It's significant that they have like that. I don't know. I think it shows. It's also like shows like the promise, like the faithfulness of God to keep His promises. Right. Even though sometimes these people are crazy. They do really stupid things, but it's also not without consequence. Like I think it's interesting to hold those like in tension. So it's like they would still feel that like in like the impact of some of those rebellions and those plagues and things like that. There's still consequences, and the impact of that is lasting. And yet, right? It's like we don't see God taking out His wrath or His punishment by making them such a small nation that they can't then have even any military power or the people to serve in the tabernacle and minister to the presence of the Lord.
Surely not every Levite was a priest.
No, not all Levites are priests, but all priests are Levites.
Okay, so given that, then if you're not a priest, are you not still liable for military service?
No. So they, so the priestly line only runs through Aaron, through his descendants, but all the rest of the Levites are doing other tasks associated with the tabernacle. And later on, it seems that they also become, like when Israel is kind of spread through the diaspora, or even in Israel, and they're more spread out because they're not all living just right around the tabernacle or the temple at that, by the time they enter the land, that they would also be, because there are cities for the Levites among the rest of the tribes. And so it's understood later that they also become teachers of the Torah in these different places. And so they kind of take on this teaching role, and as well as they're doing kind of some of like, I sometimes call it administrative, like that's not really the right way to say it. But they're helping with other tasks. So, like they're cutting firewood for the altar. They're bringing, they're keeping, they maybe are making the oil for the menorah. They're kind of administrating some of these other things that are going on surrounding the tabernacle service. Even though the priests, they probably are helping to organize and keep order when think about some of these festivals and everybody's coming and bringing all these animals. Like imagine kind of the mayhem that could ensue with you have all these people and animals all over the place trying to get there. So I'm sure that they're helping to bring order to some of that, to help that all those processes run smoothly. So there's actually quite a lot happening related to the tabernacle service that's not directly sacrificial, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Did you have something to go? Or somebody else over here? I thought I saw
Oh, just say, you could call them deacons, I guess, if you want to use the New Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a bad parallel. Yeah.
Zema, do we know enough about Jewish culture to know why 20 years old specifically was chosen as the right age for military? Like we have 21 and we have 18 in our culture for different things. Like why was 20 chosen? Do we know that?
I don't know.
Because God said so.
Because it's what God decided. I don't know. I don't know. I guess it's probably. It's kind of like one of those. It's like you have to choose an age, right? You have to set a point. Yeah.
So the Levites were set apart from the other people.
Yeah.
How come those were chosen? Were they the lineage of Aaron, you said?
Well, Aaron, Moses, and Miriam are Levites. They're all from the tribe of Levi. So, I mean, it's the tribe that God chose to be the priestly tribe, to be the tribe that serves in the tabernacle, which is interesting because Levi was not the firstborn. And so he was third. I forget. I should know this, but God chose the tribe of Levi to be the ones that were to be serving in this way. And so when Moses is called, and then Aaron is called alongside him, Moses is this really unique figure. But then Aaron is called to be the high priest, and the high priest will always come from his line, but the rest of the tribe of Levi is to be set apart for the service of the tabernacle. And it's not supposed to be they're better than everyone else type of distinction. It's just God chose to have this responsibility pass as an inheritance and as through a family line instead of because the other option would be that every tribe chooses some number of people to go and serve, but then that gives humanity a lot of options to what's the word I'm looking for? To mess it up, to put their own standard on who goes to serve. Do you have some kind of contest and the best, however, it gives if there's a leader of the tribe that gets to send people, then if people want their sons or whatever to go, are they bribing or manipulating that person to send them? So God chose to say, this is the family that's going to do this. And it's going to be that way whether they want to or not, in some sense. And, I mean, I think the intent is that they would feel like we're honored to be this, just as the other tribes would be like, we're honored to be of this line and have this role. And, sometimes it's interesting to even go back to the end of Genesis when Jacob is blessing all the sons, and you see the blessing of all of them and what they're all supposed to be. It's interesting to see, they all do have something that is supposed to be present in that tribe, and for the Levites, it's that they're to serve in the tabernacle. So, yeah. Okay. So, looking at and actually even the Levites and the fact that Moses and Aaron were Levites is interesting when you look at some of the things that we're about to get into. So in chapter 27, we have this really interesting story about the daughters of this man and their inheritance. So the daughters of Zelophehad, they have no brothers, their father has died. There's a lot of interesting speculation about this because they say when they approached Moses, and actually what's interesting is, so it lists all the daughters, and then in verse 2, so it lists all of them, and it says that they stood before Moses, Eleazar the Cohen. So Eleazar has taken Aaron's place. Aaron has died at this point. So Eleazar is now the high priest. Eleazar the Cohen and the princes of the entire assembly, meaning the leaders of all of the tribes, at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and said, "Our father died in the wilderness, but he was not one of the followers banding together against Adonai with Korah, though he died for his own sin, yet he had no sons. Why should our father's name diminish from his family just because he had no sons? Give to us property among our father's brothers." So I think there's several things that are really interesting. And again, we don't have a lot of information surrounding this. We just have the fact that they approached and this is what they said, right? But it's interesting to me that that they did at least seem to have, if they're weighing, risk versus reward here, it seems worth the risk to approach the leaders of the community, even as women. And ask for, this is a really big thing, because in the ancient world, and even in many cultures in the modern world, inheritance passes through sons. And it doesn't matter if you have 5 daughters and the 6th is a son, the inheritance goes to the son. There is also an understanding, and actually we'll get into some of it, well, it doesn't specifically say it in here, but there's also this understanding that the son takes care of, the mother, because even it's like, so it's even like if husband dies, wife doesn't inherit. Children inherit. But there is the expectation that children take care of their mother. So there is this really strong family structure, but it is all based on the sons or the male relatives, because in this case, like in this sense, I believe the inheritance would go to any brothers that the father had. It would still go to a male relative. So these women are approaching, and Moses' response is also noteworthy because, again, based on other cultural norms, he could have said no. Like, of course, this is not how we do this. This is not what we're doing. But he doesn't say that. He goes and takes the request to the Lord, which is consistent with Moses' character when he's presented with something, even if it's, like I said, by other standards, there's an answer. He still approaches the Lord to see. He's learned enough, at least, that the Lord has some different ways about things, I think, that he approaches the Lord instead of just giving an answer, which is wise. Yeah.
It's too bad that Joshua didn't always follow that pattern.
Well, we'll talk about that, why that is. Because I don't think he was supposed to. He didn't have the same authority. We'll talk about that in a minute. But, but the daughters, so Moses goes to the Lord, and the Lord's response is, and the Lord answers and says, the daughters of Zelophehad are right in saying that you should give them property by inheritance among their father's relatives. You are to turn over the inheritance of their father to them. Furthermore, and then he goes beyond. So he answers the request, and then he adds more, which is helpful. Furthermore, you are to speak to Bnei Israel and saying, if a man dies without a son, you are to transfer his inheritance to his daughter. If he has no daughter, you are to give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, you are to give it to his father's brothers. And if his father has no brothers, you are to give it to the nearest relative in his family that he might possess it. This is to be a legal statute for Bnei Israel, just as Adonai commanded Moses. So he's basically, in a sense, what we're seeing is that this is not just a one-time scenario. So it's not just for these daughters because they had the courage to ask. It's to be a law for everyone that if there are no sons, the daughters are next before all of these other relatives. And then he gives the line of the other relatives. And so this is really interesting, and there is this, and so it kind of helps us see this emphasis on, like, again, as to what I was saying, even how it doesn't like go past to the wife or something like that, which is what we would be more used to, right? In our culture, is that kind of is basically the automatic is if someone's married and they pass away, it all goes to their spouse, and then and some people have things set up differently, but the normal order of things, right, is that way. And also today in our culture, we also have that, like, and I always think it's interesting that this is my birth portion, and I am a daughter that has no brothers. So, and I am the youngest, so my sister's oldest, but whatever. But still, we don't have to, like, there's never any question. Like, I always read this and I'm like, it's so, like, this is like the root of the fact that I have no question that my parents pass away, that I receive their inheritance. Yeah. Like, I don't have to fight for that. No one's questioning that. And this is why. Right? So, thank the Lord. Praise the Lord. Yes.
So I kind of like the fact that in verse 5 it says, so Moses brought their issue before Adonai. And that word issue in Hebrew is the word mishpat, which means justice. So this was a justice issue that they were bringing, like, make sure this is right. When I think of justice, you're making wrong things right. So this was, when Moses brought it before the Lord, it's like, it seemed like their request was just.
Right.
How do we do justice on behalf of these people?
Exactly.
And the other thing with this setup, like I mentioned to Stan, we don't do this, like, if Stan dies, my kids don't get the money, like, I get the money,
Right.
right? But as far as how this is set up, if you look at the monarchy in England, and when a king dies, his wife doesn't become
Right.
the queen. I mean, there is,
Mhm.
it goes to the kid, or it goes to the, and we were talking about, like, even him and I, like, with Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth, it should have actually been her uncle, but he didn't want it. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
we're looking at, like, that type of setup where you're looking at how this is set up.
Yeah.
The other thing was with this inheritance being transferred to the daughter, I think a lot of times with keeping it with the males, they would keep that name and therefore it would stay within that tribe.
Right.
The risk you run, and I think it kind of gets more into that, is if you give it to a daughter and she marries
Right.
somebody from
From
a
another
totally
tribe,
different
yeah.
tribe, does that tribe get to absorb another tribe's inheritance?
Right.
So this is an inheritance issue.
Yes. Yeah. And it actually, so what's interesting about that is that at the very, like, actually the very last chapter of Numbers deals with that.
Yeah.
Because that is the problem. Because there is this, and they're not in the land yet, so we're not seeing, and it gets highlighted more as you move through. But the land allotted to a tribe is supposed to stay with that tribe and things like that. So yes, there is this issue with these daughters. It's like, okay, so they receive the inheritance, but then what if, and they're from the tribe of Manasseh, but what if one of them marries someone from Benjamin, and one from Simeon, and one from Gad, and one from, like, whatever, then you have a problem with all this land. But so at the end of the book of Numbers, it actually revisits this, and they kind of sort this out a bit more, and basically they are required to marry within their own tribe so that the land stays with their tribe. So it's interesting that they kind of have to circle back to that later, but they do circle back to that because of that issue. The other thing with this story is, because this is another one of those, like, there's two sides of the coin here. People like to use this story in a couple of ways. One of them, they like to go swing way to the secular feminist side of things and say, see, look, women can do anything, women, whatever, and just, like, go way, like, run with it way down that way. And the other thing is that, and I can't remember how I was going to say that, but basically a lot of people like to use it that way. And other times people like to use it as, like, still kind of see women as being oppressed, right? Because these are, like, this is, like, the one story. And sometimes it's helpful to bring it up, but again, it's like, we're trying to avoid all the extremes. Is that, like, because people like to talk about the Torah as oppressing women and things like that. And this is, like, kind of the one story. That's not really true, but it's one of the easier stories to use for the argument of, like, no, women, like, I don't know, equal, whatever. All the things. Not saying that women shouldn't have rights and shouldn't have whatever, but at the same time, I think that I don't want us to go too far to the extreme, and I think this is an interesting perspective, and this is one of the things I like, and we've talked about this before with some other issues, but this is one of the things I like about Dennis Prager's perspective, is that he is showing, like, by making their request, they're not trying to overthrow the whole system. They're not trying to overthrow patriarchy. They're not trying to cause a revolution. They're really not. Are they trying to have justice, and are they like coming before the Lord saying basically, like, I don't think it's right that just because my father didn't happen to have a son, that his whole inheritance should be, spread out somewhere else or not stay in our family. And there's justice in that. And yet they're not, and then even coming back to, I feel like it is balanced with the later story that we have but they do need to marry within their tribe, because it does still, like, it's not just a family thing. There's a greater story going on here too. And that's really hard for people to deal with too. It's like the Lord is dictating that they have to do this because, people struggle with that. We're not going to go all the way down that path right now. But the point is, that this is showing, it's this, I like this construct a lot. It's this evolution versus revolution paradox of where, again, like we're talking about, like, this is not how other cultures are going to deal with this, right? Like, other cultures are going to be like, too bad. It's going to your uncle or your cousin or whatever, you know, whatever male is next. But this is showing that there is honor in the family and for the women in the family. And so it's kind of evolutionary in that sense, is that we're taking something and we're shifting, but it's also like, we also know that sometimes lasting change happens over time. And for better or for worse, we have seen that happen with this instance, right? Like even talking about like, and you know, it's like, there's not really any issue to me living in society, even as an unmarried woman. Like I don't have, you know, there's like, I can work, I can rent or own property, I can invest, I can do all these things, right? And that's good, right? That's a good progression of this principle going forward, I believe. And yet also, a family structure is a good thing, you know, right? In a marriage and a family, a man being a head of a household is a good thing, you know? Like, leadership structures, like all these things. So it's like, let's not run so far that we overthrow an entire system when that's not what's happening here. And I know, like, I don't really think that I'm having to, like, convince a lot of people in this room, but I'm just bringing up, like, how I've seen this discussed and what I see, like, you know, it's like either you can, like, follow the heart of the Lord in it, and I think that there are, like, what I was just saying, like, I think there's some ways that we've seen that happen, even culturally, and you can also follow the heart of, I don't know, like, of society, or, you know, just this self-righteous, this hyper-independence, because at the same time, because, like, these also, it's like, these women inheriting property also doesn't make them necessarily independent of the rest of their community. Like, these people they're still living a communal life, you know, like, it's not, I don't know if I'm being super clear about what I mean by this, but it's just, you know, I just think it's important to see, like, they're not trying to overthrow a whole system. They're trying to bring more balance and righteousness to it, knowing that other people, and I think they didn't maybe have the foresight of it all, of all the generations that would come next, of, like, what happens when, you know, this is bound to happen again. They're not going to be the only family where there are no sons, right? Yeah.
This is a perfect example of how, you know, sometimes there's that element of society that want to just burn it all down and, oh, it shouldn't be that way.
Mm-hmm.
You just make up your rules as you go along. But this is a perfect illustration that there's a whole lot involved, layers and layers of reasons for this to be the way it is. And you can't do justice by just suddenly burning it all down.
Right, for sure. Yeah, it's one of the things. So Dennis Prager has studied world history, basically. And one of the points that he makes, because he studied all of these revolutions, is he's like, revolution doesn't work, actually. Like, revolutions don't actually bring about healthy change. And he brings out about, like, Russian Revolution and French Revolution, these different things. Like, it doesn't, it's really, if there is anything good, it comes at a great cost. And he brings out, and he's like, I know people bring up the American Revolution, but it wasn't actually a revolution, it was a revolt. So, in that they weren't trying to revolutionize, like, Britain's laws and society, they were trying to detach from it. So it's a different thing. But he brings that up in his commentary because he's like, I know everybody's going to say the American Revolution, and it's different than some of these others. And so again, pointing to, and like, this is something that the Lord has highlighted to me over the last couple of years too, of just like, he is willing to bring change through generations. Yes, he sometimes does dramatically do things and cause a shift in things. But oftentimes he is very willing to work through generations to bring a shift. And I think I've seen that in families, in individual families, and in cultures. And it's something that gives me hope for some of the cultures that seem very resistant to the Lord, that it's like, even if there are small pockets of believers, over time, those growing relationally, even if it takes a long time and it doesn't come in this big, you know, revival of thousands of people or something, Like, there is lasting change, and the Lord is still doing something, and He's willing. It's okay. Like, He works sometimes. He has the long game in mind. We are very motivated by the quick, like, the Lord showed up and dramatically healed this person, which is fantastic. I'm not saying we stop sharing those testimonies. I'm just saying that we also see that sometimes He is, like, bringing massive shifts that look to us very slow, but they're going to last. So, anyway, that was further than I meant to go with that, but but I think it's important, and it's just like something that always sticks out to me when I get there, just because of even my own family. It's like one of those interesting things, like the Lord sometimes just gives you those connections. It's like, yeah, I've never questioned that I'm going to receive inheritance from my parents as a daughter, even though I have no brothers or anything like that. So, thank you, Lord, for these daughters. Okay, and so then we move into another really interesting. I'm running the risk of not getting to the holidays, and I'm going to be really sad about it. But also the next section that we get to is the commissioning of Joshua. So we have another, not necessarily inheritance, I would say, though I think inheritance is maybe a fair word to use for it, but a shift, a transfer of authority, maybe, which is also a kind of non-traditional route happening here. So we already know that Moses does not get to go into the land. He gets to see it. So we have, starting in verse 12, Moses gets to go up. He tells him that he's going to go up the mountain. He's going to see the land, and then he's going to die. So Moses, perhaps in his unique and wonderful wisdom, says to the Lord in verse 15, Moses spoke to Adonai, saying, "May Adonai, God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the community to go out and come in before them, who will lead them out and bring them out, so that the people of Adonai will not be like sheep without a shepherd." So he knows he's not going, and he's asking for the next person, right? So I don't know, and this is like another one of those things. Like, I'm like, I wish I had a little bit more. Like, I wish I knew what Moses' process was when he clearly accepts that he's not going into the land. But I still am like, I feel like that would have been a really emotional experience for him. And I kind of wish we had more information about that, of just like, even though he's accepting what the Lord is saying, like, to have gone through this whole journey must have been such an emotional experience for him. Yeah.
Don't we have in Deuteronomy where he continually prays that he can go into the land, and then finally God says, "Stop.
Yeah.
Stop asking. You're not going."
That's true. Yeah.
And so, kind of have to slip that into.
That's true. Yeah, we don't have it. It's not necessarily a linear account here.
Right.
We do have some of that later. So he does clearly wrestle with it. I just am like, sometimes I stop thinking about that, and like the depth, like how difficult that would be, is just like, whew, it's intense. Yeah.
It brings reflections like that.
Mm-hmm.
Makes me think of like the reality and the humanity of the characters. Like,
Yeah,
kind of like
for
the
sure.
Joseph has helped us see.
Yeah.
Kind of like, oh, that was very human of him, and that joke and that
Yeah, for
gets
sure.
out of the narrative. Like, as you're mentioning this, I'm also thinking David trying to build a temple and saying like, "No, sir, you won't."
Yeah.
And then, okay, he follows
Yeah.
and he obeys, but
Yeah.
like that wrestle and the
Yeah.
wrestle and the wrestle. And
Yeah.
I think there's
Yeah.
something very beautiful in the
Yeah.
humanity wrestle.
It is because it's like, because he's still very clearly carrying out his role,
Yes.
right? Like he's like, even the daughters, like he already knows he's not going in the land by the time this thing happens with the daughters, but he still is.
Yeah, involved.
He still is faithfully doing his role, and yet he's also wrestling with the like, but really, like, he's really holding that tension, which is a very, I think it's, kind of at the core of human experience, is to hold those deep tensions. And so then even it's like, I wonder, like, I wish, it's like one of those things, like, we all read, and this is why I like to read and study scripture alongside other people is because it's like we all read this and it's like I feel like sometimes if I picked 5 people in the room or something and we read verses 15 through 17 and thought about what do we think Moses' voice was like, we would all and then read it out loud, we would all read it with a different inflection if we were kind of thinking about the emotion behind it, because we all have a lens that we read through and it there's something about us that we read into it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We have to keep it in check and make sure we don't read ourselves into the text too far, and yet we are supposed to connect with the human experience of it. And so it's I wonder if Moses is, feeling the depth of emotion in this, or if he's all right, Lord, you said this and this is what we're, I wonder what his inflection was. It's one of those things about having written text, it's you don't get all of that. And we don't have any emotional cues really in the wording even. So I don't know. Another one of those things I think about is there's different approaches that he might have said this. But regardless, he's asking for the next person to come and lead the people. And the Lord responds. So Adonai says to Moses, "Take Joshua, son of Nun, a man in whom is the Ruach, and lay your hand on him. You will have him stand before Eleazar the Cohen and the entire assembly and commission him before their eyes. Give to him some of your authority, so that the whole community of Bnei Israel will obey him. He will stand before Eleazar the Cohen, who will pray and obtain judgments for him by Urim and before Adonai. At his mouth they will go out, and at his mouth they will come in. He and all the community of Bnei Israel with him." So we learn a lot of things by these few verses. One, we learn that because is Joshua from Levi?
Nope.
He is not. So this is not a generational family line transfer of leadership. It says that Joshua has the Ruach, which is very interesting. Moses is supposed to lay his hand on him. And this happens before the priest and all the people. Whereas when Moses is called, so there's lots of contrast between how Moses is installed in his position and how Joshua is installed. Because Moses is called by the Lord himself, right? Where this is happening at the direction of the Lord, but in front of all the people. It is a corporate experience. And it says, give him some of your authority. So it's not that he's actually not being installed into the exact same position as Moses. He is to lead the people. The people are to listen to him. But where, we've talked about before, I don't know if any of you remember that Moses is unique in that he encompasses these kind of primary roles of prophet, priest, and king. And we don't see anyone encompass all 3 of those roles, sometimes 2, usually only 1 at a time, until Yeshua. And so Joshua is not being installed into that same role. Because also it tells that we find out here that he is not going to have the same, and part of it is he's not a Levite, so he can't actually go in to the tent of meeting in the same way. That he is not going to speak directly to the Lord. Are there times the Lord appears to Joshua? Yes. But as far as when people bring issues to Joshua, he does not go directly before the Lord. He goes to the priest. And the priest goes to the Lord, and then we have this weird supernatural deal with the Urim and the Tumim, and how great mystery. We're not going to chase that rabbit today. But basically, this is that now kind of the roles are split, and the separation. There's more separation of power, you could say, in some sense. And so Joshua's role is very significant. What he does is very significant, but he does it differently than Moses. And there's potentially a few reasons for this. But before I share that, I'm finding myself really wanting to hurry up because I want to talk about the festivals, but we just might not get there. So I'll slow down a second. But so anyway, so from this, what Moses instructs about kind of installing Joshua into this position, and I already mentioned some of the ways that it's different. It's but why do you think that Joshua's leadership needs to be so different?
Some of it is that he actually is a military commander that fights.
Yes.
Because he's not a Levite, where Moses didn't really have that permission. So, I mean,
Right.
so that's a major element.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely a big. Yeah, I mean Moses was, Moses was a Levite, so he wasn't going to be part of the military. And because of all the other things that happened, they were not yet at the time for military conquest. But yes, coming into the next generation, they are going to be going in and taking the land, so they do need a military leader. So that's important. So what else?
Repeat the question.
So why is it so important that Joshua is to be such a different type of leader and function so differently than Moses?
Because he's not Moses.
He's not Moses. That's a really important distinction.
Well, and didn't it say Moses was like God
Right.
to the people?
Yes.
And the shift is Aaron's not supposed to be like God
Right.
to the people. His function, his role, the promised land layout, we no longer have somebody bringing somebody through a wilderness.
Yeah.
And
You mean Joshua?
Joshua.
You said
yeah.
Aaron. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Okay. No, you're okay.
He's no longer supposed to be bringing them through the wilderness, and now we're getting in there. He's going to be partitioning them out, sending them out. But with the spread of the land, these tribes are now kind of going to live independently again.
Mm-hmm.
Where before in the wilderness, we're all together moving as this, even though you're still within your group, you're moving in, you're not settled. You're these tent dwellers who are looking for every provision from Moses to give to them. This is going to look really different when they go into the promised land.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that just giving just the portion, it's enough of a portion to get things set up, but then from there, it's not that they're supposed to be looking to Joshua to receive all this instruction anymore.
Right.
Like they had to with Moses.
Right. Because who is actually supposed to be the leader of Israel? God. Right? So Moses, I think the Lord was kind to give Moses to be this, this face, this physical representation to help kind of mediate that, because it was such a shift from being slaves in Egypt to becoming their own nation. And I think the Lord knew that many individual people are not going to be able to singularly follow the Lord without a really anointed leader to help keep them on track, and to even model this going before the Lord, seeking the Lord's answer, giving the Lord's answer, even though it's, counter to what they would expect in culture. Bringing the Torah, bringing the 10 words and the instruction down, and even receiving the pattern of the tabernacle, and then, being able to help guide that process of building the tabernacle. But now they have the tabernacle, and they have the presence of God dwelling in their midst, right? And so, and they move, but they only move when the cloud moves. And again, that's gonna, that when they're in the land, they're not living this nomadic lifestyle. So things are gonna really shift when they come in the land for sure. But God is always supposed to be the leader of the people, and so by then we have this kind of separation. But he still gives people in roles to help mediate that interaction, right? But it's not all in this one person, because at this point, and I think this is a good principle too. It's like, so yes, you did have, this one guy, but it doesn't stay just the one guy. He has, in essence, and we don't have, again, this is a little bit of, maybe this is me maybe stretching a little bit, because we don't have all of this specifics in the word, but he's, in essence, discipled these people. Joshua's been with him, right? Like, this commissioning of Joshua is not like the first time Joshua is coming before the people. Like, Joshua has been with him as close as he can be without being killed by the presence of the Lord, I think. Seeing how this is functioning, seeing how Moses is functioning, at the same time probably knowing that he's not going to be Moses. Because, again, it's simple but true, right? Joshua's not Moses. So to expect him to function like Moses is also unfair. But it does, since God chose him and he's shown his character, it does seem that, and this is, I think, this is why many guess that it's not like a family line leadership, because Moses has sons. We don't know anything about them, right? There's no, they are really not a part of the story. And again, there's lots of people who have lots of guesses of why that is. But the point is, that's not who God chose. So whether it's because their character wasn't there, whether God was trying to say, don't just rely on the fact that because you're the next generation means you're going to step into the same place. Like, your heart still matters. How you understand the Lord and how you desire to serve the Lord still matters. Which is different from the priesthood, so we have both in some sense. It's like, but God is still choosing. It's not people choosing this. And we see, and later on when it talks about, wherever it is in Deuteronomy, that it's like, eventually you're going to ask me for a king. And it would be better for you if you don't have a king, but I know that you're going to want a king, so when you have a king, they have to do this. And then we read the record of all the kings, and we see that having a king doesn't actually go so well most of the time. Sometimes it goes very well, but only when they do what the Lord said. Right? Wes?
Yeah. Well, I think the other part of it, too, is like establishing the paradigm of the priesthood here. Because Moses wasn't the high priest. Still.
Right.
But later when it talks about how you go about getting judgment and how the priesthood is involved in that, why do that when you've got the guy who can just go talk to God directly?
Sure.
Right? Well, clearly God is intending that doesn't stay the case forever. Like, the priesthood is that avenue for them to go through for that.
Yeah.
And so I think just the systematic structure, like the next phase of the system as a whole, is like, this is opening the way for that. Now you still got the one guy Eliezer here, right? But if I'm not mistaken, later it talks about more priests being involved in in how to do things, and then Levites themselves are like dispersed here and there to help.
Yeah.
That's kind of thing.
Yeah, and again, if we let's zoom way out for a second, right? So it's this progression. So we kind of start out with Moses being like God to the people, and yes, we have Aaron as well as the high priest. But Moses has this unique going into the presence. Hold on a second. Has this unique going into the presence of the Lord. So then we're shifting to Joshua, where Joshua has authority and command over the people, but he is now kind of in partnership with the priesthood to go before the Lord and to get an answer. And so the priest is still filling this role, and throughout the priesthood of the rest of the history of Israel, while there is a priesthood, gets complicated when we lose whatever. But simply speaking, the rest of the priesthood, we still have this kind of mediating, and then other roles are fulfilled as far as the rest of the Levites helping to educate and to I think probably encourage and help people know how to live the life that God wants them to live. But ultimately, like, what's the ultimate goal? Like, the ultimate goal is not that we have a priesthood and a temple and like there's this one spot, right? Because otherwise, if that was the end goal, then why did Yeshua come? And yet, this whole process is supposed to point us to something in Yeshua. It's not like Yeshua comes and all this doesn't matter anymore. It's like, how does Yeshua fulfill all of this? I just taught kids at Tikkun the tabernacle, and I taught them how Yeshua fulfills all the parts of the tabernacle. And so it's like seeing the light of the menorah, smelling the incense, eating the showbread, washing in the, cleansing in the laver. Yeshua fulfills all of those things. He is the embodiment of all of those things, which are supposed to teach us how we approach the Lord. So there's elements of worship that are happening, and there's different layers of revelation as time goes by, and the people are supposed to be taking that in. And I think even as New Covenant believers, we're supposed to take in some of the truth of that, of like how we come before the Lord. And we have direct access to them. He has filled us with the Holy Spirit. But I think that there's some things, and we're not going to we don't have time to go into the depths of it because we're supposed to be ending right now, but there's all these, like, you know, the Lord's setting up this system of worship and this system of acknowledging his presence, and as the leader of the people, it's supposed to prepare us for the Messiah and then come to greater fulfillment in the Messiah, not say, oh, we got the Messiah, we don't need all this anymore. So seeing even that this has this first, I would say, shift between Moses and Joshua shows us that we're moving towards something greater, right? So we're moving toward a greater reality where, and I think even ultimately to the body of Messiah, in some sense, like I've said this before, like it's just me and Jesus is a lie. And this is something I was hoping to talk about even with the festivals, is it talks about, all the festivals talk about a solemn assembly, and we've talked about, and it's been taught in the main service multiple times about how Yeshua is the fulfillment of all of these feasts, the spring feast especially, and then we're kind of prophetically in the fall feast, but even to some level we've already had some of that too. But all of them, it's like you do it together. And so thinking about the body of Messiah, it's like we actually can't fully follow the Lord by ourselves still. Like even like we're seeing here, like they have to do it, everybody has to fulfill their role to keep the presence of the Lord in their midst. They all have to live by a certain standard. In the same way, we all have to be following the Lord and becoming who he's created us to be, and speaking the things that he is put in us. And we all have blind spots, right? We all have to have people around us that have to say, like, hey, like in this area, you're not seeing this. And you need to fix that because it's going to cause you problems. Like, we have to do that for each other. And we also have to, like, acknowledge that some of us are, like, the evangelistic type. Like, Miguel can walk around on the street and talk to anybody he wants. And I'm like, how do you do that? Like, he can just strike up the conversation. And it's like, yes, there can be training for some of that. And not that we're not all supposed to be willing to talk to the person that the Lord puts in front of us if he tells us to, and treat people in a way that exemplifies the kingdom. But it's like, and some of us teach, and some of us have prophetic gifts, and some of us have hidden, like all these different giftings. Like, we have to, like, we need them all, right? It's like and there's like way more. Like, the Lord uses all of us in so many different ways. But it's like, I think that this transfer and the way that even Joshua leads differently than Moses, and even that Eliezer kind of functions differently than Aaron, is this point to, like, they need each other, and they're all part of bringing the presence, and as the body of Messiah, we all need each other, and we are all required to bring the presence of the Lord, and we have to do it together.
Amen.
Thank you, Lord. Shabbat shalom.
Thanks, Bella.
Thank you.